afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today we're here to talk about the two Myers-Briggs types that I have never been mistyped as. Yes, I am such a polished person, completely being myself, that no one can figure out what my true self is. Well, at least that was the case until just recently, where I finally started getting a group of people that were like, okay, we are seeing some serious patterns of ISTJ, and anyone that says otherwise just doesn't know typology. But before we get into that, I thought it would be fun to look at the types that I have been mistyped as, and talk about, I guess, some notable moments of like why people might have thought a particular way. The first type that I was ever mistyped as was the ESTJ, but that was mainly me that made that faulty assumption because I didn't know about the cognitive functions at that point. I didn't really know what all the letters meant. I just read this quick assessment online that said, okay, choose between E and I, S and N, T and F, and J and P, and I just immediately was like, extroverted because I'm outgoing, but that was the key mistake that I made, is that extroverts and outgoing people are completely separate categories, and Myers-Briggs said that as well. In fact, Carl Jung's definition of extroverted and introverted is actually slightly different than the dictionary, but that's off topic. Let's stay focused. The main thing is I mistook my faulty meaning of what the word extroverted meant and thought that it applied to me because I'm an outgoing and talkative person. Lately I've been a bit more reserved, but back then I would say that I was pretty exuberant when I talked to people. You know, I liked to make sure that people felt welcomed, and I wanted to make sure that I was doing God's will and talking about Him to as many people as possible. But at the same time, I was also chaperoning a lot. So I think that's probably where the ESTJ came from, was just I was a bit like dogmatic when it came to the rules. I would say like, yo, don't even put a toe past that line. It says guys only, you're a girl, don't be crossing the line. And they were like, oh, Paul, you're so legalistic. And I said, would I be if I were the one stepping over the girls' line? Think about that for a minute. And seeing as they didn't answer me, I think they recognized my logic. And yeah, I could come across as pretty ruthless at times, but when I'm not in a leadership position, I don't really like telling people what to do. It's really only on a when needed basis. The next type that I was mistyped as was the ENFJ, and that was after I realized that the preliminary just pick the letters test was not a very reliable one. So I forget which one it was next. I think it was either anyway, the next test I took said ENFJ. And if I had to guess why that was, it was probably because I was really into theology. And I was like, super spiritually charged. And I suppose, like, by nature, theology is kind of an abstract topic. And I have even had people that think that I'm an ISTJ say, how can an ISTJ be Catholic? That's such an abstract concept. But I guess, when you know Jesus, you're willing to bend the rules of Myers-Briggs a little bit. Not that I would bend the rules anywhere else, but anyway. I think the fact that I was trying so hard to make sure people were included as a part of being a disciple of Christ probably manifested itself as heavy, dominant, extroverted feeling in the tests. Either that or I took the wrong test, because I've heard some of them are very skewed in the wrong direction. The N was probably, I don't know, I think I was pretty goal-oriented back then. At least I think I was. There was a time when there was another personality assessment that I took, and I believe it was called the Strengths Finder. And the number one strength that I got at the time was futuristic, which is weird considering all of you that know me today probably consider me one of the least futuristic people ever. But I think that's because I was dead set determined that I was going to be a youth minister, and then I distinctly remember after I stopped wanting to be a youth minister and decided that that wasn't my calling, I remember thinking that my goals for the future just completely disappeared, and I have never recovered from that to this day. But I think that might have been a contributing factor as to why I got ENFJ. A few times I got INTJ in the tests. I'm not really sure what they were thinking there. It could have been that I was coming across as a bit aloof in the answers. Like, they were probably thinking, oh, That's 7, function extroverted, feeling for you. He's not noticing other people's pain, which I still don't, I'm still not great at that, but I've gotten better because the introverted sensing stores all my mistakes and then I learn from them. A couple of times people said ESTP because they thought that I was quite the realist, and they, I guess, thought that I have my own reasoning, which is weird when you see which types I haven't been mistyped as. ENFP is a pretty well-known one, but I'll let all my videos with Esabelle do the talking there. I think that was because I was doing a Would You Rather with Esabelle, and I was being very silly and exuberant on that show, which is typically a trademark of really all of the EP types. The nature of a game show, plus the fact that I had just met Esabelle in person for the first time ever, made me more exuberant because I was happy to see her. But I guess maybe they took that as, oh, the FP types are the ones that vomit their emotions out. And the ENFP is also the ISTJ subtype, so it's possible that that side of me comes out a lot more on camera than when I'm talking to people in person, because pretty much everyone that's actually met me has said that ISTJ is indisputable. There was one person, though. When I went to see Esabelle, 2 of the days of the vacation, her sister came along. I didn't mention that in the vlog, but yes, her sister came along, and it was quite the pleasant visitorship. I'm drawing a blank on the word. And she said, Paul, if I didn't know you better, I would have thought you come across as an INFJ. And I was like, whoo boy, why on earth would you say that? And she said that it was because throughout the trip I was constantly asking everyone if they were okay and what I could get for them and is this okay with you? And I just said, I think that if we go by the Linda Barron system, that's because ISTJs and ESTJs are the only 2 Myers-Briggs types that are affiliative as opposed to pragmatic, which means they're constantly thinking about the group, inclusion, interdependence, and working together, to name a few things. And I think that's probably why I've been mistyped as every single feeling type, is because I just have such strong affiliativeness that people mistake that as being a feeling function, when in reality ESTJs are affiliative, but yet they have extroverted feeling in their 8th position and introverted feeling in their 4th. So not a whole lot of feelings are going on in that type, but they're still affiliative because they want to do the right thing and they do think about the group, interdependence, working together, that kind of stuff, which is what, if you were to make a tier list of like the most evil Myers-Briggs types, ESTJ would not be at the bottom because of their affiliativeness, and they would even say, how dare you call me evil? I am one of the most upstanding citizens you'll ever meet. You can check my police record and everything. So, see you there. Even when they want to do the right thing, they're a bit aggressive. So now that we've talked about the types that I've been mistyped as, what about the ones that I haven't been? Well, there are only 2 remaining. And those 2 are the ISTP and the ENTP. I already said ESTP because I have a little bit of an outgoing side, and I was recently told that I come across as an INTP, so only a few weeks before making this video I would have said that there were 3 types. The person never explained his reasoning, and after I explained the cognitive functions, he quickly backed off on that, so I don't know if he was just spouting possibilities or not thinking straight, but yeah, he was like, I think you might be an INTP. And I was like, why? That makes no sense. I'm not the oblivious type. So why the ISTP and the ENTP? Why are those the only 2 types that I have never been mistyped as? Well, if we think about what those types have in common, they both have really strong introverted thinking. Like, really strong introverted thinking. The ISTPs have it in the dominant position, and while for ENTPs it's secondary, you still can tell that they use it a lot, because when they argue, they tend to use their internal logical framework, aka subjective logic, to come to the realization of what they believe. And I'm the type of person that doesn't really like the idea of having an internal logical framework. I think that it's potentially anti-gospel because Jesus always talks about the truth, and Pilate says, what is truth? You know, like that sounds more like an introverted thinking statement, is questioning the truth, whereas Jesus is just like, duh, there's only one truth, guys. Get it through your heads. Of course, Jesus was probably an ENFJ or an INFJ, so I think he'd say it a lot nicer than that, but bottom line is, They both use very heavy introverted thinking, and I do not. For the ISTJ, introverted thinking is in the critic position, so that means that it can sometimes come across just as strong as the secondary function, not quite to the level of the dominant, but just as strong as the secondary, but it's always going to be overridden by the secondary. So ISTJs and INTJs actually have pretty good reasoning skills, and they could probably hold their own against the TP types in a debate relatively well, but whereas the TP types are going to over depend on their introverted thinking and only accept truths that they personally understand, the ISTJ might say, okay, this makes sense, but it doesn't fit the facts, and then they might disprove their own logic. In fact, that's what the critic function is that what you're most critical of. And for ISTJs and INTJs, that usually tends to be their own personal reasoning, because they prefer to go by the facts. But what about ENTP? Why have I never been mistyped as that, but I've been mistyped as the ENFP? Well, I think it's because ENFPs use introverted feeling in the secondary, and so by that logic, that means that extroverted feeling would come off just as strong as the introverted feeling. There are times when it can come across as though I'm emotional vomiting, especially when I talk about games that I love. But from what I've recently studied from Type with Mongolian Mindsets channel is that all of the introverted feeling types like to talk about what they love. That's just easier for them to do because introverted feeling is more about personal emotions, personal goals, personal morals. I can certainly relate to that more than subjective logic. I think ENFP is more likely because they also use extroverted thinking, which is the get things done, we want to know what is, not what we think is. So they come across as less postmodernistic in thinking that truth is relative. Of course, them being extroverted intuitives, they do have a tendency to like possibilities, which is kind of contradictory to that idea. But why I think it can't be ENTP is because ENTPs have introverted feeling in the blind spot, which means that they often don't know what they're feeling. And if you ask them, like, how are you? What is your identity? They'll be like, I have no idea. And that does not fit me in the slightest. Like, I always know how I'm feeling. I might not always know how to describe what I'm feeling. And when I do try to describe it, it might either be downplayed or I'll, like, give a lot of awkward pauses being like, I don't really know how to word this. But I certainly am not unaware. I'm certainly not clueless, and I'm certainly not against the idea of having personal values. By definition, the fact that I'm Catholic is a personal value. By the fact that I'm wearing this shirt is a personal value. So yeah, I can't relate to that struggle that the ENTPs have. Plus, I don't think I'm a dominant intuitive anyway, because all of the dominant intuitives are pretty clueless of sensory stuff, like especially the EP types. Like they have extroverted sensing in the eighth function, which means that they have next to no reference of the real world and are like really clumsy or forgetful or oblivious, not noticing the details, and if they do notice the details, they forget about them the next moment. That is not me in the slightest. When I reminisce about stuff like my mission trips and retreats, I'm all about the details. In fact, I've been told by one of my friends who claims to be an ENFJ that I'm way more of a weather reporter when I talk about the past than she is. She would talk about the underlying principles and the feelings associated with the event, whereas I went on and on talking about the layout of the building and the color of the carpets. And well, I didn't really describe too much of what people were wearing. I suppose that's more of an extroverted sensing type of thing. But yeah, I'm all about those little details. I want to know what time everything was. What did we eat? What were some of the ways that I walked? Was I skipping up the stairs? The principles and stuff, I really don't give a darn about that. And that's another reason why I think I've never been mistyped as an ISTP or an ENTP, is that introverted thinking is described as an internal logical framework, which also means that they like to think about why something makes sense. For me, sometimes I think about why majorities of people don't make sense. Like I might say, well, I don't get why these people have such a herd mentality. Why is it that so many men leave the toilet seat up? Why is it that so many people go past stop signs? Why is it that women like to wear makeup? You know, that kind of stuff. It boggles my mind that there isn't more individuality, but then there's also too much individuality, but we'll get into that in another video. But yeah, I don't think I could be ISTP because I'm not constantly questioning the reasoning behind why something is true. What matters is it true or isn't it? And usually I rely on my five senses to determine if something is true, or I look at the experts and try to verify what was their method of determining that something was true. How did they test it? That kind of stuff. Who cares about why 1 + 1 = 2? What matters is it does equal 2, so why think about it further? Another thing is that ISTPs have introverted feeling in the demon function, which means that they are so logically driven by everything that they don't see the idea of personal morals as something that makes sense. For them, they might say, like, why the heck would you have an emotional attachment to anything? Now, sure, they have extroverted feeling in the fourth, but because it's in the aspirational or inferior position, that means that oftentimes they're like, okay, I think I'm detecting what other people are feeling, but why should I care? It's so illogical. But so they kind of have to force themselves to care about other people. But then you usually hear stories about like how ISTPs are actually really caring people, but they just show it in their own way. I don't think I'm like that. I think I'm the type of person that I value loyalty and honesty and integrity. And so when I really trust someone, I try to make it abundantly clear that I do. But I don't think I navigate people's feelings very easily. If I do, it's because I've made mistakes in the past and compartmentalized it so I can learn from it, or I've studied the scriptures and the catechism enough where I can say, okay, well, based on this scripture and this doctrine, this type of behavior would be unacceptable as a Catholic. And I think that's what gives people the illusion of extroverted feeling, but I personally think it's just being affiliative. I want to do the right thing. I want to be interdependent. Independence, not really something I've ever really wanted, except for days when maybe I'm frustrated with the people that I live with. But I think everyone experiences those feelings every now and then. I could never identify with the pragmatic approach of, I want my freedom, I want to do whatever I want. No, I don't want to do that, because again, moral relativism. What's right for you is not right for me. No, 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 no. I want the truth, the rules, the law. No ifs, ands, buts. I get it that everyone's going to be subjective to a certain degree, but when it comes to the rules, I would prefer to just stick to a system. So I hope that explained well enough why those are the only two I've never been mistyped as, and why I just don't think I have introverted thinking very high in my function stack. I think the critic function is pretty perfect for what I think about it. I'm overly critical of my own reasoning. I don't like to trust my own subjective logic. I want to trust the facts, what is proven, what is definitive, what is something that you undeniably cannot disprove. You cannot disprove that this is a hand, for example. I know the introverted thinkers will say, well, what makes a hand? So if this equals this, then does that make this a hand? No, I don't want to hear it. You all can dispute it in your mind. You're introverts, so that's why it's called introverted thinking. So just save my comment section from all that nonsense. Anyway, I hope you had some fun with this video. Let me know down in the comments if you agree with that assessment that those two types make no sense. Do you think ISTJ still fits, or do you somehow think that introverted thinking is not in my critic? Either way, you all have a wonderful day, and until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!